What's up, summoners? King Blair here. Today, for Top 5 Wednesday, since we weren't able to do it on Tuesday, we're going to be talking about the top 5 heroes that before release, we thought they were going to be amazing, game-breaking meta units, but when they were released, they did not live up to those expectations and ended up just being okay, mediocre, and for the top one on this list, just straight up bad, right? So, if you like the video, make sure you like, subscribe, and join the Discord server. Link down in the description. Without further ado, let's get right into it. As always, if I say something wrong or if I miss a unit, please let me know in the comments. I do read all the comments and I love having discussions. And since it's the top 5, there's a lot of opinions based on this. So if you have a different opinion or heard different things from other people, let me know in the comments. I love to hear more, and I'm sure other people watching this video will like to see other things that people think. But with that, let's get right into the video. Again, units that just before they were released, when we saw the kits, we were like, man, this could be really good for the game. They're going to be really awesome. And then once they were released, it was just kind of eh. And this is something that we did last week the other way around, where we thought they were going to be okay and ended up being really good. This is the opposite of that. And it just goes to show that in a gacha game, it is really hard to really be able to get a very accurate estimate on what a unit is going to do. For the most part, we do get a pretty good job, right? And I actually do go back and see some of the ones that I may have talked about in the past, and I do like to keep track with them. But again, you're going to get them wrong every once in a while, and it's going to happen, which is why I always say you should watch different sources and make your own decisions on your own. I always try to promote that as much as possible. And with that, we're going to start with the honorable mention, which is going to be none other than Holiday Yuffie, and to set the mood. Now, the reason why Holiday Yuffie is on this list is because she actually did end up doing the role that she was meant to do when she was first released, which was to push Bazaar out of arena defense meta. That was her biggest role, and to be a Bazaar counter, right? She was the first limited unit that just wasn't a very solid game-changing unit as well, right? We had Baiken that was amazing for Banshee and a lot of other PvE content. We had Dizzy, which was just broken for everything at the time. We had Tien, who again was just insane when she was first released, and we have Seaside, who again, Seaside Bellona was just killing it, right? She was the first unit to kind of just be there as a counter unit to a different unit in the game, which a lot of people were disappointed by, but they thought that she would still be able to be a good DPS since her S1 ignored elemental disadvantage, which means she could actually hit Seaside. And she could get her own Gab, and Gab we thought was broken because, you know, RB Gab is broken. Well, she ended up just being a Bazaar counter, and that was the extent of her role and as far as she actually ended up going. She did not live up to the hype that limited units usually did end up having, and she was not as powerful as people thought. Her ratios are decent, they're not insane for the fact that she even gets a Gab and is able to do damage of them. She wasn't just cleaving teams left and right, and a lot of people thought she would be able to do that. So again, kind of one of those things that I definitely overestimated her. I know other people did as well, but again, she did do her role in arena. In RTA, it's just this whole dynamic with pre-ban and post-ban that she didn't really counter Bazaar just because the Bazaar player, most of the time, you still have to ban the Bazaar because if they ban your Holiday Yuffie, you still lost. So you were forced to ban their Bazaar regardless. And if they didn't ban your Holiday Yuffie, then you were left in a situation where you're most likely going to lose because she wasn't going to do that much aside from just counter Bazaar. And she had more counters than you would like to think, right? But again, not a decent unit. She almost saw really good play recently because of the Guide to Decision artifact. But Angel, Light, Angelica release, as well as Rem and all these other counter heroes really shoved her out of the meta and stopped her from getting any chance at the spotlight. But that's going to be for the honorable mention. I definitely got that one wrong, and I remember going back to the worth it in my suggestions. I was like, oh man, I was so off on this unit. But it's gonna happen. But now let's get to the number 5. Starting with number 5, we have none other than Outfelt. Now she has gotten buffs since her release. She's actually a pretty decent unit after the buffs. But before the buffs, she was the first limited hero that you could honestly skip and not lose any sleep at all. We thought she was going to be this crazy cleave unit because she was able to decrease defense and sleep, right? And I think she still had the strip, but there's only one buff, and I think it was after, right? I don't think she was a Riley counter. Again, don't quote me on that. I'm not 100% sure pre-buff how the strips worked. But we thought she's going to be able to come in, you know, decrease defense, sleep the target, and then come in and execute, right? At the time, believe it or not, one-shotting in Epic 7 was a big deal, right? We did not have a lot of heroes that could just straight up one-shot targets in Epic 7. That was not a thing, right? We didn't have Strasses. We didn't have, like, Riley was really good, and he was, like, one of the units that people were, like, thought was really good because he could almost one-shot a unit off the gate. But we did not have a lot of just one-shot type units. That was not a thing, right? And the fact that she could get an extra turn right away, or she slept, she got an extra turn, people were like, man, she can be the first one-shotter in the game. You could ignore F-Res, so people are like, ignore F-Res with Basar, that's pretty broken. So that means you can ignore F-Res and potentially kill a unit right off the bat. People were super hyped for it. People were like, oh, you could even maybe 2-tap Arby, right? And you come in with the S2, that would make it so this used to not increase attack of all the allies. I think it only increased attack on herself. And if it was sleep, I don't think she used to. I'm not sure about the effects before. But again, we thought she's going to be this one-shot monster. Then she came out. We saw her ratios, and they were kind of doo-doo water, right? Her ratios were just not there. She could not kill anything with a Soul Burn and an S2. That's just the way it was. She was just not able to do it, right? So she ended up becoming this unit that people thought was going to be this insane cleave type unit when she first came out, and just she ended up not, right? She needed setup, and she just didn't have the damage to just push through and be a really good cleave unit, which just basically left her in the dust because there's so many other units in cleave that can actually do her role but better. So again, Alpha, very disappointing. Now, post buff, actually a really cool option. I think she has a lot more potential in a cleave. It's just cleave is so tight right now with how their units are that she doesn't see as much play. But definitely has potential for some really cool play now, right? Her buff definitely made her more unique and a little bit more deserving of that limited tag. But again, probably the most disappointing limited as far as power level goes. But now, let's go on to number 4, and we have none other than Briarwitch Iseria. I believe she had the lowest rating for a very, very long time after release. But before release, people thought she was going to be this amazing monster cleave unit. Why? So let me set the stage for you guys. At the time of her release, Rylet was doing pretty... I think Rylet came before or after her. I'm not too sure. I think Rylet came when she came out, so evasion was a big deal. But I can definitely guarantee you that Assassin Cartuja, right, used to be a very, very big deal. We did not have Symbol of Unity, right? We only had things like Oath Key to try to be able to hit evasion type defenses, and Assassin Cartuja defense was a pretty annoying meta defense, right? With Briarwitch Iseria, we had a unit that could reliably hit this evasion unit. And yes, evasion meta has been around for some time. We thought she's going to end evasion meta. We thought she was going to be the second coming of Basar, because Basar had bad matchups against fire, but we were like, this unit can kind of do what Basar does, but she's dark, and she can hit more reliably. And also people thought she's going to be this insane cleaver that couldn't miss and was going to do tons of damage. Well, she ended up not being able to do any of those roles effectively, right? She did push Assassin Cartuja out of the arena defense meta. After her release, Assassin Cartuja saw a massive drop in usage because people were actually using Briarwitch in their cleaves with Oxots, right? Oxots cleave still was popular at the time. This was before Polides, right? So you could still Oxots cleave with her, and she did decent enough damage to actually kill the Assassin Cartuja defenses. But outside of that niche situation, her damage was not up to par with what other big AoE DPS units are. And as far as a secondary support Basar unit, this S3 used to not be 100%. They recently made it a 100% chance to actually land these debuffs. It used to be like 85%, and on top of the 15% innate effect rest effectiveness, she did not land that a lot, unlike Basar, who can soul burn and get that guarantee and bring his own book, right? So that unreliability is what made Briarwitch not as strong as Basar, and she just didn't do as much damage as other traditional DPS units, to the point where she just ended up being kind of an okay unit, and definitely did not live up to the hype of this massive AoE hitter that could destroy evasion units, right? But again, to this day, I don't think she's bad. Even like after the bus and even before the bus, it was just she was always very hard to use, because you have to decide on what you want to do with her before you actually pick her. If you want her to be a support or a debuffer, you need to give her effectiveness and speed, which means she's not doing damage. And if you want her to be a DPS, it means you're not giving effectiveness or speed, which means you're not going to be doing applying the debuffs, right? So you have to go either debuffer or damage dealer, and either role, it always just feels unreliable. The damage side, it's just the fact that she needs the soul burn to actually do big damage because her ratios aren't like insanely powerful, right? So again, very, very weird situation for Briarwitch. Still, I think is a solid unit. It's just really hard to use her. And I think she is on the comment recently because, again, with all the evasion units, it would be cool to see her try to be more in the meta, but it's just so hard to build and actually implement. The Briarwitch definitely did not become this monster of a unit that people thought she was going to be. But now, at the number 3, we have none other than Celine. Now, before you say Celine is amazing, Celine is waifu, you have to realize how hyped up this unit was when she was released. She was released at the same time as Rylet with the evasion, and it was the first time we saw such high evasion and evasion buff type units, and Oxlots was literally everywhere in the game, right? And the big thing was with evasion, we only knew about Assassin Cartuja and a little bit of Violet, but Violet was not as strong back in the day. But with Assassin Cartuja, it was very annoying to deal with evasion type units, right? Because they could stick around on the board for a very long time. Well, people thought she was going to be the meta defining unit, that you're literally going to see her everywhere on the planet. Defense, offense, RTA, everywhere. She was going to be literally everywhere. Well, the big thing ended up being, for Celine, she does do her role at countering Oxlots quite well, but before her buff, she was extremely reliant on the artifact. And having to have a max artifact for a unit to do her job properly made it so people didn't experiment with her, which meant that she did not see almost any play compared to how much people thought she was going to get. Because what ended up happening is, for Oxlots, before she got hit her EE, this was a completely random skill. It could just go on anyone, right? So there's a chance that it would go on the right target. There was a chance it would not, right? Again, it was just completely RNG, right? If you had Oxlots. There was cleaves that really didn't care about Celine, or they had a 25 and 75 and they would just take the chance. The other thing is that in a defense, outside of countering Oxlots and units that did not use their skills, she didn't really do that much because she had to do the S3 to get the evasion. Unlike Rylet, she didn't open with evasion, so she wasn't as hard to deal with as people thought. She's quite easy and squishy to kill, and she was usually pretty slow, so you were able still to like just kind of bait the cleave, right? Some people were cleaving with Fallen Cecilia. That was very common to do as well. You would slap on a Fallen Cecilia and still cleave like normal, even though Celine was there, and it was just like, oh, you can't kill, right? So unless you had an insane Celine, you were not getting value out of your Celine, right? So if you guys saw the hype versus what she actually did, it was like, she was not a bad unit. She definitely saw some play, right? She was definitely used against Oxlots. She was definitely used against certain units. Even to this day, she's used against Amelia, but that was after her artifact was more accessible, since it gives the attack buff without having to actually max the artifact out, right? So she's definitely more accessible, but even now she doesn't see that much play except for like Guild Wars and an occasional counter pick in RTA. Whereas we thought she was going to be this monster of a unit that was just going to destroy the meta because you couldn't take her out with evasion, and she was able to heal, she's able to do big damage on the S1, and she could even counter cleave and do a lot of damage. Well, for the most part, the evasion really didn't matter for her. She ended up becoming more of a just counter to Oxlots, right? But again, it's not bad, right? Which is why she's not number 1 on this list. She's not a bad unit, but nothing like we thought she was going to be, like this evasion monster like Rylet was, right? And not as prevalent. For how prevalent an Oxlots was, Oxlots did not drop off in play because of Celine, right? So even though that was her complete role, she still saw significant play. It was Polides who stopped Oxlots, not Celine, because Celine was actually quite easy to deal with. But now that leads us to the number 2 hero, who is going to be none other than Illena. And man, Illena is a more recent one that really does hurt. Sometimes I forget this unit exists, and I am sure a lot of you guys do as well, right? Illena is actually a unit that right now just sees zero play, and her and Charles suffer from the same problem. We kept thinking of her as the Fire Charles, which she ended up being, which is a bad thing, because in today's day and age, Charles and Illena are too slow and too RNG heavy compared to other units like Violet, compared to other units like Rem, who can actually do a lot of impact on the board. But before Illena came out, we were like, okay, first, AoE attack that gave increased critical hit damage. That's crazy, right? That was like, okay, that's exactly like Charles. Charles gives attack buff. She gives C damage buff, right? That's cool. That's awesome, right? Then we saw the S2, and we saw that it does dummy damage. And this skill does do dummy damage, and it applies injury. And at the time she came, we were still in a very slow meta, where it was a lot of tanks, right? I think it was during the Golden Boys era, right? And we were like, oh, injury is amazing. She gets increased defense, and you're able to do tons of damage with this skill. And we saw the S1 that, again, if you counter, she has a 50% chance to trigger the S2, right? So you're able to apply consistent injury. We were like, oh man, is this the hero that kills tank teams? Well, just like Charles at the time, Charles was really good when he was first released, but more recently, she essentially is literally Fire Charles. They both have buffing S3s with S1s that can trigger off of their Elris swords that can potentially trigger a very strong combination, right? Both of them function exactly the same. Both of them don't see play anywhere right now in Epic 7. Why? Well, except Charles still has some PvE usages just because Charles can actually strip on the S2. But why is that? Well, it's the fact that this is 50% and she still has to counterattack and take turns, right? So she's a unit that needs counter set, needs Elris, needs to proc that counter and Elris, and then has to check another check to get the S2 over the S1 because the S1 does not do damage, right? And this amount of layer RNG really pushed Illena down to a point where she just doesn't do anything. When you compare this to someone like Rem, even though Rem only has a 20% chance to counterattack when an ally is hit, which is the exact same as Elris Sword, once that triggers for Rem, Rem gets a massive AoE attack that strips or reduces buff duration and applies on healable, right? That's a lot. When Violet dodges, he's guaranteed to get a counterattack, right? These are very big, impactful. When Belian counterattacks, she's counterattacking with a massive AoE. Well, Illena is only countering single target with an S2, right? That's all she's doing. And you have a chance to not even trigger that, right? You have an extra check that is not there. And she has to trigger it because if she doesn't trigger this S2, she just doesn't do any damage and doesn't really do anything and have a presence on the board, right? Without her triggering her skills consistently, she has no presence on the board, and injury as a whole is a flawed mechanic because it's just too slow. Epic 7 has gotten way too fast to the point where injury just doesn't function as fast as people want it to, and she can't apply it fast enough like a Belian on injury set to actually make it be impactful in the game state, right? So overall, Illena definitely did not become this monster counterattack unit like Charles was. We all have Charles PTSD to some extent. We're all very scarred from the Charles days. That we thought Illena was going to be this amazing broken unit, but she ended up just becoming kind of okay. And to this day, really doesn't see any play, right? For how hyped people were about her, really doesn't do that much. But now, at the number 1, you guys should have known it. It's the great Mortilix. Mort is the epiphany of a hyped up unit who just ended up being absolute trash. So what happened with it? Why did we think he was going to be good in the first place, right? The reason people thought, including myself, he was going to be good is, again, he came during a time where penta tank teams were extremely meta. He came right after that season. And we all have been there to Frenzy 7 matches where these high health knights were just winning the fight. And when we saw this S3 and we saw Mort could apply 20% injury, he was the first unit to apply injury AoE. He was the first injury unit, right? Overall, we thought he was going to be the answer to these tank teams. And we were like, man, he can apply these injuries AoE. He gets this passive to buff himself up. And he has an S1 that gets a guaranteed decreased defense. This sounded like the makings of one of the best tank busters in the entire game. The S2, everyone knew was kind of trash. But the thing about it is, Tywin was really popular. And Sage Ball was really popular. Well, he's immune to both, right? So we're like, oh, they can't even stop him. Right? They can't even stop him. And he gets increased speed potentially, right? So he's getting buffs, he's moving, he's doing S3s, he's scaling, and we're winning. What happened? Well, he was released, and the flaws started popping up. First, the S3 did not do enough damage. There were so many situations against Fallen Cecilia type teams, right? Because Fallen Cecilia had always been around for tank teams. Doesn't do any damage to the barrier, means you don't get any injury. You have to wait 4 more turns to get your next S3. Which means that you don't get that injury for the first 4 turns. That's too slow, right? The meta was also starting to become much faster. 20% injury at the start of the battle, even if you got the full 20, wasn't going to make it or break it for that match alone because, again, the pace of the fights are too fast, right? Games are ending quick. They're moving fast. He takes a while to set up this S3 and actually stack up the injury. So, again, another thing going against him. But again, the biggest one is going to be those ratios, right? The ratios just did not live up to the hype. He has gotten buff since, but the fact that he was so bad for so long, people still don't want to give him the time of day, even though I think he's actually a decent unit now, right? He actually has very reliable decreased defenses and actually has really decent injury damage now because of the buffs that they did. But again, it's just the bad taste that was left in everyone's mouth with how bad this guy actually ended up being. But that is going to be all for today. My throat is absolutely killing me. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you next time. Peace.